is that the example that my kids are going to remember? They're not going to remember that.
I had to cope with that because we get so locked into, well, it's got to be this way. And it's like, well, no. Hey, everybody, welcome to another great episode of the Grow Your Side Business podcast, where I help those of you who are also successfully discontent be able to create a profitable side business. Now, you know, when we do interviews, we don't just talk to people who can give us like the fluff or, you know, you can do it too. No, I like to talk to people who either made the transition. More importantly, they are people who can help us understand what do we do next when we're successfully discontent. You've got the job, the house, the car, the money, but something is missing. And I got another great interview for you today because this gentleman has what I consider the story we all share, right? We're at the top of our corporate game, and you know that you're really good at what you do, but you've kind of gotten bit by that so-called entrepreneurship bug, or you look at life and you go, wait a second, I know that I am probably valued by my company, but I could be doing even much more, making an even greater impact out in the marketplace. But I don't really know what I should be doing. Well, this gentleman is going to be able to help us out because there's a conversation that typically happens between a lot of us. And I've talked to you all the time. You all send me information and you send me DMs and you say, hey, you know, I like the idea of starting my side business, but I hate sales. Well, guess what? Today, I've got somebody that we're going to have a conversation with because one of the biggest things that I notice most people struggle with when it comes to building their side business is they freak out because they actually have to put their name out there and their message out there into the world. We're going to cover all that today. Let me give you a little bit of background on the gentleman you're going to hear from today. He is the creator of this. He's a sales transformation expert. Here's the cool part. He has an 8-figure sales growth expert coaching program. I don't know about you, but I would think that he would be somebody we'd want to listen to about this. More importantly, we're going to talk to our guest today about why is it that so many people in corporate or so many people outside of the world of actual business hate sales so much, and what can we do about it? How do we start making ourselves more comfortable with that? We're going to talk about that as well. He is inspiring sales and transformation all over the globe. And here's the cool part. Got a chance to work with the greats of the world, the Tony Robbins of the world. He knows the Dean Graziosis and others. And here's the great thing. He's here with us to share his knowledge. I want to introduce to some and present to others Neal Tricario. Did I get that right?
You nailed it, Chris. Man,
Love it.
it's such an honor and a privilege to be here with you and your audience. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Neal, here's where I want to start because I said it in the intro, and I think this is one of those things that maybe we've messed up the view or the perception that should be around sales. So before we get into your background and everything else, just
Sure.
give us like the 30,000 foot view landscape of like, why is it that if somebody's out here saying, hey, they're going to build their side business, they're going to grow it, what is it about sales that we've either got misnomers about or things that you see all the time where you're like, oh my gosh, we gotta change that, right? What are some of those things that trip people up when they're on this journey?
That's a great question, Chris. And it really speaks to, it's my most favorite question of all, and it speaks to my personal mission. See, what happens for entrepreneurs or just people in general, when they think about sales, they think about something they have to learn to do, some training they have to be able to sell, to be able to convince somebody to buy, to overcome objections. And the reason there's so much friction in our minds when thinking about sales in that way is because it's gross. No one wants to be sold to that way. That's not how human beings connect with one another. So it's incongruent with how most human beings look at relationships. So my whole personal mission, Chris, is to demystify sales as something other, something that we have to learn to do, to train to do, learn some manipulation skills, say and do things that trap people in a corner, or worse yet, overcome their objections. Why would we be overcoming anything? What sales really needs to be about is letting go of all that, peeling back all of that, and coming back to our true self, because our true nature, Chris, is to connect with other human beings. So when you think about the attributes that exist in your primary relationships, whether that be your spouse, significant other, best friend, partner, business partner, there's a connection there. And so all sales is about is understanding those capabilities within us that enable us to connect with another human being. Now, in business, the opportunity, though, is we've got to do that in a way that happens quickly. So in marketing, we've got to educate and put ourselves out there in a way that's authentic and real and connective. And when we have a human to human sales interaction, we have to be able to quickly connect with another human being. And the best way to do that is to move away from our own preoccupations of selling something to them and just saying, hey, I want to get to know this person and then see what they need. And then from there, we can determine whether we can and should help them.
Yeah, I think this is a great conversation because I was taught that way. You got to go sell. I mean, I remember the days I've hustled my way Kirby vacuums back in the day. Some people don't remember those things, but I
I
hustled
do.
those things in Atlanta, Georgia.
I
I
do.
I know what that's like.
Yeah.
But then you said something that I think is interesting, addressing the need of the person that you're trying to help. And I've heard from yourself, I've heard from a lot of people talk about this idea of service and addressing needs versus sales and overcoming objections.
Yes.
Why has there been such a resistance to this idea though of service? Because in most cases, as a solopreneur, right, and when they're stepping out and starting their side business, they're like, "No, I'm trying to make money. I'm trying to, I'm trying to hit the sales goal."
Yes.
What is that, and why have we had to make that change to getting people to be comfortable, even if you're the CEO or the solopreneur, that you got to think service first versus hitting a sales goal? What talk to me about that and how you kind of typically approach that with people?
Yeah, great question. I mean, first and foremost, the great news is no one wants to be sold to anymore, Chris. I mean, we don't answer the phones when we're getting cold calls. We don't answer the door anymore when someone's knocking that we're not expecting. We don't want to be pitched and sold to anymore. So the great news is the world is coming around that they don't want to be sold to anymore. But when you came up and when I came up, that was the thing. It was coffees for closers, Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross. And for me, the first realization for me, I was highly successful in software sales in late 90s, early 2000s. And I almost left the profession because it was so hardcore. When I moved down here from Silicon Valley to San Diego and I had the opportunity to work with Deepak Chopra and I was interviewing with him, he wanted no part of marketing and sales. I mean, he really crossed his fingers at me. And what came to me in that moment was I said to him, hey, listen, Deepak, I'm going to partner with your head of marketing and I'm going to lead sales, but we're not going to talk about it in those terms. We're going to talk about marketing as education and sales as service. And so for me, that's when it codified in my physiology that that's what this is really all about. And what's important for entrepreneurs and people starting out, with the side business is we have to hustle, right? So the energy, the mindset, the physiology can be around hustling. We want to make sure that we're hyper clear. Service doesn't mean we're not hustling. We want to hustle, drive, get after serving other people.
I like the way you frame that, because I do think that's a hard transition for somebody in corporate, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if I'm Mr. or Mrs. whoever and so and everybody goes to my beck and call, it's hard to be like, well, wait a second, now I'm going to go out and serve people. I've been served at my leadership position all of this time. So I think I love the way you framed that. I want to get into your background. So
Sure.
you mentioned Deepak Chopra that you got a chance to work with. Talk to me about who Neal was before you ever run into a Deepak Chopra. What were you doing? What was the day-to-day world like? What was your corporate life like? And more importantly, I think the thing I also want to understand is, what was the aha for you Where did you find yourself successfully discontent as you were on this journey?
Great question. So, for me, like I shared briefly a moment ago, I I I was a reluctant salesperson. I came up with a political science degree, wanted to get into law, worked as a paralegal, went to law school, and I had an epiphany that law wasn't for me. All of my fellow students were interested in the analysis. I was interested in advocating for my client. So I was at a turning point in my life where I decided to leave law school because I had accrued some significant debt and didn't want to accrue more, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. To a person, when I reached out to friends and family, they all said sales, but I was reluctant. I mean, my very first sales interview was that stapler interview where the sales manager put the stapler down in front of me and told me to sell it. And that's an interesting story. But anyways, point being, so I got into sales, like I said, late 90s, early 2000s. This was the internet boom. I was selling software and I was highly successful at it. But what was happening was that I was going through each night when I'd go home, I'd kind of have to shower off this approach, and I was making so much money. And in all fairness, sales is the most entrepreneurial position you could have. It's the most entrepreneurial job you could have. And it was only when I decided to leave the profession that things shifted for me significantly. And I was blessed to be introduced to a woman by the name of Joanne Martin Braun. I mean, of all the people that I've been blessed to know that are recognizable, no one knows about this one, but she was like a career psychologist. And I went through this process with her because I wanted to get into another profession. And it was part like psychology therapy, so I would sit with her and she would interview me, part assessment. Well, lo and behold, it came to be that my strengths were leadership and sales. So what we created together was a one pager of my dream scenario. So we spent a lot of time putting it together, but that I was going to look for a place of employment that had massive impact on the world. I was going to be really specific about what organization I went to and that they were serving, that the leadership team was purpose driven, that I would have an opportunity to transition from individual contribution into sales management. So looking for a player coach kind of role. And Chris, we put all this into a one pager that I slept with under my pillow. I visualized in the morning before I woke, when I woke up, at night before I went to bed. And really long story short, when I came down here to San Diego and started looking for places, those seeds were planted not only in my brain and my physiology, but out into the ether. So when I got an interview with the Chopra Center, even though I didn't know who Deepak Chopra was or that impact of service and contribution, that opportunity came to me. So my discontent in the software world was, based on feeling incongruent. It wasn't until a few years after the Chopra Center that I felt some discontent and some need to get into some entrepreneurialism.
Yeah, what year was that you worked with the Chopra Center?
Yeah, great question. So I was with Deepak from 2004 to 2008. I mean, it was amazing. We took that events business and center business from less than $1 million to 2.6, 5.2, then 8. And by the time I left, it was 12 million.
Wow. Now, when and how in the world do you go from there to Tony Robbins?
Yeah. Great question. So, I was really fortunate. I'll share a quick story with you. So I felt like I had found home at the Chopra Center. Like entrepreneurialism wasn't really pulling at me just yet because I had so much freedom within that organization. But Deepak and Tony, we're friends, are friends. And so it was just natural. At some point, Deepak introduced me to Tony. Tony's vice president of sales became a mentor of mine. His VP of recruiting helped me quite a bit. And the way that all went down is, I started to experience events with Tony Robbins. But like I said, I really wanted to stay with Deepak. But at one of the events, when I was at like my peak of fulfillment at the Chopra Center, I remember I think it was in, I want to say it was in Pennsylvania. And, we will stay in hotels and different things, but this time we stayed in a retreat center. So Deepak was hanging out with us. And I remember sitting with him and saying to him, I'm like, hey, Deepak, I found my forever home. I'm going to be here forever. This is my career. I'm so happy to be here. And, he looked me in the eyes, and I don't do his accent well, so I'm not going to do it. But he said, no, Neal, everybody that comes to the Chopra Center, this is an arc. You're not going to be here forever. This is going to be a chapter in your story. There's something we needed from you, and there's something you needed from us. And I was heartbroken. I just was like, oh, like I was crushed. But it was through that introduction to Tony that I became open to, there are these chapters in life and career, and why hold on to it. So bringing the story full loop is in 2007, 2008, when the economy hit the skids, Tony at that point was only focused on personal development. So all of his courses, his events, all of his curriculum was around personal growth. Now, he was a coach to captains of industries and presidents, but he had no business course. So he partnered with Chet Holmes that summer of 2008 to do an event called the Ultimate Business Mastery Summit. That's the binder, the original binder from that right there. It keeps me connected to it. And so in essence, I was on loan that summer to be a part of this team that was going to sell that event to help entrepreneurs and business owners who were choking during this economic downturn. We had this tremendous event. It was such a success that that Chet Holmes and Tony Robbins partnered, and that's when Business Mastery was formed. That's because I was the top performer on that team. I'd enrolled the most people. I was invited to be the director of sales of the Business Mastery program. So that's how I wound up in sales leadership in Tony's world.
Man, that's awesome. Last thing I wanted to ask you about here. There's a lot going on right now in
Mm-hmm.
corporate. There's a lot of layoffs. A lot of organizations are making like huge shifts. One of the things that I had been talking about the last few years, especially post-pandemic, is that the thing that no one saw coming as a result of the pandemic was companies accelerating their move to the future.
Yeah.
Automation, changes, right? Like realizing we don't need as much as we thought we needed, right? To be able to
Yes.
run efficiently. And that impacted a lot of people. It impacted the seasoned folks who felt like, hey, I've got my forever home, right? And
Yes.
realized, yeah, maybe, the company may make a change and you need to make a shift. Just really quickly, I would like your perspective on
Yeah.
why do you think it's important for corporate people to give themselves even permission to pursue a side business?
I think it's really powerful to give yourself permission to do that, because I'll use this example that Tony teaches. He calls it the rocking chair exercise. So if you're 80 years old and you're sitting on your porch in a rocking chair looking back at the totality of your life, what are you most proud of? And so what I applied it to myself was, well, gosh, I mean, if I'm looking back, the truth of the matter is I'm going to be spending I will have spent the majority of my time in someone else's business. So am I going to be like rocking back and forth and being like, oh my gosh, you know, I increased so-and-so's business from X to Y, and sure, I was paid commensurate with but is that the example I want that my kids are going to remember? They're not going to remember that. I mean, they're going to remember connection and things like that, but I have an opportunity to set a different kind of example. So for me, speaking of my own personal experience, um, I was happy, at Tony Robbins. But the discontent was that I felt like there was more to contribute, an opportunity to leave my mark. It didn't have to be like in a big, profound way like Tony and Deepak, but at very least for my children. And you know, all of this is purposeful, right? So when I came up in sales, it was all about achievement, hitting targets, hitting goals, making a lot of money. But when I started to realize that first twinges of disconnect was the struggle with achievement versus purpose. And we have a tremendous opportunity now to give ourselves permission to pursue a side business. I mean, Chris, I can't compliment you enough, man. I love what you're doing because there is an opportunity, if your mindset and your heart set is right, to do a side business. See, because when I was coming up, all of the teaching was around like, if you wanted to be an entrepreneur, you got to burn the boats, you got to go out there, you got to, cut everything off and do it. And I did that. I did that a couple times and blew through a bunch of cash I had saved and, money I'd borrowed from my parents and in-laws, and I failed. But when I went back, second, third, fourth time, what I was testing was a side business because I wanted a purposeful life. I wanted to create an extraordinary life of connection and fulfillment. I wanted to create freedom for myself. I still needed to provide for my family so I could do that in the job, but really test entrepreneurialism through a side business. But it requires a level of discipline and hunger and drive to do both. And then I ultimately was blessed with the opportunity to ultimately have that side business become my own business. And now I'm a full-time entrepreneur, and it's been fulfilling. So the permission is to explore what the most extraordinary life could look like for you in totality. And if you're looking at where you're spending the most of your time, that's your career. So are you going to look back when you're on that rocking chair and say, well, I made the money and I provided and everything. And yeah, I mean, that I'm not suggesting that that's not enough, but what if you had an opportunity to provide, create an example for your kids? I mean, I didn't realize this, and forgive me for going on and on, but my son is just on the other side of me, and he's been listening to me for years, and he's a little entrepreneur. I mean, now in high school, they have these events where they can get a booth, and he's selling merchandise and things online. And I never sat with him or talked to him about it or anything like that. And I asked him about it. And he's like, yeah, I mean, no, I see you doing it. Like, I want to get my own car. I want to do stuff. So if anything is driving you inside out there, audience, that says, gosh, there's more purpose to this. You not only owe it to yourself to give yourself permission, I would argue that you have a moral obligation to pursue that.
Man, what well said. And shout out to your son for taking what you're doing and making something of it. Because as you know, as a parent, they do
Yeah,
more of what we do than what we say.
for
And
sure.
so I think that's just so incredible that he's finding his own way and he's starting early,
He's
right?
starting early,
He'll go through the bumps and bruises early enough
early.
that he'll
Yes.
be much more successful when he's on his own. I just think that's super powerful. I'll give you the last word, Neal.
Yeah.
Yes, we're around the holidays and people are thinking about different things, but I will tell you, for those of us who are successfully discontent, we know it's time. We know we need to make the leap. We know we need to take, the bridge to entrepreneurship by building a side business. What would you say to somebody right now who is not just thinking about it, but they've actually started and
Yes.
they're in it right now.
Yes.
Their business is going and they're
Yes.
trying to continue that path. And yeah, things might be looking weird in corporate, but I'll give you the last word of wisdom, from your experience. And because you've done this already, what would you say to somebody who's already started that side business? They're kind of growing, but they're running into some challenges and some bumps and bruises and trying to manage the world of corporate and building the side business. What would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, being that I was thinking about this before I came on, being that I failed let's just say 5 times in the last 13 years at this, I would say the number one thing is, especially since it's a side business, is you must stick with it. Okay. It doesn't happen overnight. A couple of those things that I left too soon. So the number one thing that I would say is you must stick with it. You never know what's going to come. You never know where it's going to go. And there's a high likelihood that if you don't stick to it, you've likely ejected before the magic. Because I think another myth is that someone is built for entrepreneurialism versus someone else who may not be. I mean, I don't know about you, Chris, but like, I'm almost 50. Like, I don't remember, I mean, certainly not my mom. I mean, she only talked to me about being a doctor, lawyer, or dentist, but no one ever talked to me about entrepreneurialism. My godson, I just went and visited him at Ole Miss. He has like a minor in entrepreneurialism. It's awesome. So it's a learned skill. It's not like, oh, I've been in this career for so long, I'm destined to have a job. No, it's a mindset that says, I'm going to go for this, but you have to have the stick to itiveness of it. And then the second thing, I just said one last word, but the second thing I would say is, with that sticking with it, is be open to the possibility that the business model that you land with may not be your original business plan. And in all likelihood, it won't be. And I remember trying to remember, because I would like to attribute it to him, where I heard that. Shucks, I can't right now remember, but I heard that somewhere, and that really struck me on my journey. Was like, oh, okay. Because if I keep trying to force what it is I thought the business would be, I'm not allowing for what the market wants. But if I've got that drive and that stick to itiveness and open to pivoting to what the market wants, then I could have my ultimate outcome, which is a business that serves the market, that creates that freedom and flexibility for me in a way that matters most to them. Right. I don't have to hold on to, well, gosh, I wanted it this way. So I guess it's two-part. You must stick with it. Even when you think it's impossible, you're failing, no one's showing up for your master classes, your lives, or any of your stuff, or liking any of your social media, you got to keep going. And then you got to pay attention to your market and be open to the possibility that your ultimate winning business model may not be your original business plan that you set out with.
I love that, Neal. Man, thank you so much for your contribution to the world. Thank you
Thanks,
for the
Chris.
fact that you chose to continue, right? I've heard it, the way you were talking about it reminds me of what I heard the first time, and I struggle with it so hard, so for such a long time, which is, you marry the vision, but you date the strategy. Right.
Yes.
And so I had to cope with that, because we get so locked into, well, it's got to be this way. And it's like, well, no, that way could be, not profitable. This way can
Yeah.
make much more impact, and you get what you want, right? But you got to be
Yes.
okay with that strategy constantly flipping, because things change when you're doing real business, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
man, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for stopping by the show. We appreciate you. And more importantly, let me say this, man. I think the cool thing that you have uh is you have a real life story that's tangible, that's sticky to people. And I'm just gonna ask you, keep telling it, man. Keep sharing it, keep letting people know that, like, listen, I'm just like you. The only difference is, I love the way you put that, you didn't eject before the magic. That, man, that's
Yeah.
the line right there. I
Yeah.
love that line. I think that I wrote that down when you said it, because I love that. Don't eject before the magic. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here, Neal. Hey, everybody, listen, if you enjoyed this episode, first of all, in the comments, in the messages, I want you to leave Neal a message. What was most impactful to you? More importantly, you guys know I say this every single interview. What is the next step you're going to take? Not the 10th step, not the one way down the road later in 2024. No, what are you going to do right now? I want you to make sure you share those in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the Successfully Discontent newsletter, which drops every single week, that gives you tips, strategies, tools, information for you to be able to continue to build you a successful, profitable side business. With that being said, thank you so much. My name is Chris Williams. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Grow Your Side Business podcast. Take care, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode.